All right, Derek, you there?
Yep. Can you hear me all
All right.
right?
Yep, go for it.
All right. Good morning, everybody. First off, I want to thank Bonnie for giving me the opportunity to present to you all. And looks like you guys have a great turnout over there. Wish I could be there, but this is kind of the day and age we're in, so we'll just go with it. I want to be a resource to you guys. So I've been with Bayer for 3 years now on the range and pasture and vegetation management side of the business. It's interesting. So Bayer's broken up into the crop science and then environmental science. So within environmental science, we have a turf group, we have a pest management group, and then we have our group, range and pasture VM. So I'm going to have my contact info up. I'm going to give a few talks today. Hopefully you're not sick of me by the end of this, but if you have any questions on VM, range and pasture, or some of the pest management, turf type stuff, if I don't know the answer, I can get you in contact with some folks that would. So just want to be a resource there. And really, I just want to provide hopefully useful information. You guys are going to be drinking from a fire hose today. I understand that with all the information that, all these presenters, including myself, are going to throw at you today. But, I just want to, walk through some of these key ideas in terms of newer chemistries, new options for you guys. And my first talk is going to be on Roundup and glyphosate. And I'm going to throw in a little calibration at the end because we got this new kind of tool that I think will help you guys with calibration and stuff. But in terms of Roundup and glyphosate, I'm sure a lot of you have gotten questions. I know I have all the time, right? From family, friends. You get, you're out doing something, or you're out spraying for sure. People come up to you and ask if you're spraying Roundup and whatnot. So I'm gonna go over, what is going on with Roundup. As there's some slides that are just kind of corporate slides, very text heavy, but I'm gonna try to break those down for you just so you can better understand the situation. Where we're at with this, and how do herbicides get to market in general, and are the products you use that have a label, are they actually safe? Because I don't know about you, but even going out spraying plots, spraying operationally, if having that sense of safety and having these products that you trust that aren't going to be harmful, it's very important. And then we'll talk through some of those ideas. But to kick things off, I just wanted to begin with this slide, and I think it's very important as you guys as you talk through, as you get questions from customers, from people that ask about glyphosate and herbicides in general, that you're able to talk through this. And what's important to note is that to get an herbicide to market, it's not just as simple as we discovered this in the lab, we're just going to apply for a label within a year and get this product out in the market and use it broad scale. That's just not how it's done. And EPA is very rigorous. There's very high standards to the data that they require to get a product labeled and registered. And what's important to note is that to get a product to market, there's over 100 safety studies that are conducted. And I'm going to show a graph that kind of breaks that down by cost. But overall, and it's right around $300 million to get a product from discovery all the way to market. And a huge chunk of that, 70 some million dollars, is all safety driven. And what's interesting is that as these companies develop all these tools, and I'm going to show you a graph that shows you how many products don't make it to market because of a tox issue, a fish issue. If there's anything in those in the line that has an issue like that, it may be a promising chemistry, but the company will nix that and take it off the market, or could not continue to develop it. And it takes to get it to market a total of 11 years of testing and rigor, and that's efficacy, that's safety testing, it's all of those things. But just something to think about when someone comes to you and says, they're just approving all these chemistries, and are they actually safe? There's a lot of work that goes into getting a product to market and developing that label so it can be used safely and effectively. This is a breakdown graph that kind of shows you what goes into the cost of getting a chemistry to market. And what's interesting is you look at 95, it was about 150 million. So that was in 95, that's a lot, 150 million, right? 2005 to 8, it was 256, and we just saw today it's right around 280 to 300 million dollars to get it to market. And if you look at some of those top bar graphs on that 256, that red one is toxicology, environmental chemistry, so water issues. That's 50 million, 60 million in just studies and research right there. And then registration, all those other costs, the biology, and does this actually work? So just to show you the breakdown, and when someone asks you, just to be able to have this in your mind and say, yeah, there's a lot of testing, a lot of work that goes into getting these products to market. And this is kind of a breakdown of, once you get that package and it is a promising chemistry, how does it get to market? So you do all these administrative screens. EPA looks at all the data requirements, and then they have a whole team that goes through and in their science division and reviews that whole package. And that package is what took 11 years to develop. And then they make a preliminary decision, which has an open comment period, and then they make a final decision. And then that's when a product does or does not make it to market. And what's interesting is, and this is the case for 2,4-D and some other chemistries, recently, after every 15 years, it's not like you get a product registered and it's safe, you say, okay, I'm good, I can sell this for as long as I want, even if there are issues in the future. What's interesting is that every 15 years they have to re-register it and re-review it. So then they go through all the new data, all the new scientific findings to, again, review and make sure that all these products are safe that are on the market. And so a product like glyphosate, which we'll get into, has been around for 40 plus years. It's had to go through these rigorous processes, EPA reviews several times, and that's not just in the US, but in other parts of the world as well. So that's just something to think about. And then I just thought I'd throw this in. I've had this in other presentations, but when you look at herbicides and different modes of action and whatnot, they're broken into not very many different classes. You have, glyphosate, which is the gray bar. You have your ALS inhibitors, which is, your plateau, your imazapyr, those type products. But really, a lot of our chemistries fall into these different classes, and just some information for y'all. And then this kind of goes off of those different modes of action, different products, and when they were developed. So it's kind of interesting when you look at this graph on the top. So the ones in green are ones that were actually commercially reviewed and made it to market. The ones on the bottom, look at how many products from 1980 to 2010 actually did not make it to market. And that could be due to anything, a toxicology issue, efficacy issue, anything within that chain of 11 years, it'll drop off. So when someone goes and they think that all products are registered and it's very easy to get through EPA, it's really, really not at all. It's a very rigorous process. And when you look at glyphosate, or when you look at 2010 onward, there's not that many products that have been discovered and new modes of action that are coming to market. So this will kind of tie into, I'm sure, what Rick, Claire, myself will talk about throughout the day is utilizing some of this newer chemistry and preserving what we have, especially as resistance becomes more prevalent. When you look at glyphosate, it's right there in the middle. So that's EPSPS, and that is your glyphosate, which was marketed in 1974. So it's been around for a long, long time, and arguably one of the most studied and most reviewed product that's ever been that's been to market. Okay, so how does glyphosate work? Like I mentioned, it's been around for 40 plus years. It's been used by all these different entities, farmers, land managers, gardeners, homeowners, all the like, right? And what happens is what's interesting about it is it has only foliar activity. So as it hits the soil, it's inactivated because it binds to that soil, and it's inactivated and broken down by microbes. So as you apply it to the leaf, it gets translocated to the root, those new growth, the root tips, and then that's how it kills the plant. It just basically starves the plant because it can't produce the proteins and enzymes that it needs to survive. And what's been interesting about this tool is it's broad spectrum. It's been used widely in all these different situations, and it's environmentally proven to be a very, very safe product for the environment. And in terms of benefits, I'm not going to read through all of these, but it has the ability to control, like I said, a broad spectrum of weeds. It has economic and environmental benefits, both ag and non-ag. It's added to all of our VM mixes for, its broad spectrum ability, its pricing, it's priced relatively cheaply. And then its strong safety profile, which I'm not going to get into deeply, but in terms of some other chemistries, it does have a really safe profile. And then, we've used it, like I said, in places where we live, work, and play. It's used all over the place, in lawns, landscapes, parks, sports fields. It reduces public health pests that live in unwanted vegetation, like we see in vegetation management, and it provides a solution to eliminate invasive and noxious weeds. So it's something that is very important. And the reason I wanted to, and supply some of this information is really to be able to equip you guys and be able to defend what a tool like glyphosate can do and why we need it out there and why you guys need it to do your jobs effectively. Because right now, this is arguably one of the most studied and well-studied products by all of the world in terms of health organizations and environmental organizations. And if this is at risk, all the herbicides, all the pesticides that you guys use or will use in the future are at risk. So it's important that we start this conversation now and be able to talk through it. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty now. So the Roundup glyphosate, what's going on? Why did this all come to the surface in terms of Roundup over the past 4 or 5 years? And really, what's interesting about this is it came from a decision that the Interagency for Research on Cancer, so IARC, which is 1/4 of the World Health Organization, they came up with a decision and said that it was a probable carcinogen. And I'll talk through kind of the reasoning behind that. But what's interesting is you look at that pie chart. Like I said, when you see the commercials on TV, they say the World Health Organization has said that glyphosate causes cancer, right? When you look at it, it's actually 3/4 have publicly, 3/4 of that, so 3 of the 4 groups of the World Health Organization have said that it does not cause cancer, and 1/4, the IARC, is the one that has. So actually, when you look at it, the World Health Organization, 75% of that group has publicly come to the table and said that it does not cause cancer. And what's interesting, and I'll talk about it as well, is that what IARC is different than the other parts of the World Health Organization, EPA, and some of these other regulatory bodies, is they do not take exposure amount into account. So they just look at hazard, and I'm going to talk about that in some more detail. But it's very important to make that distinction that the IARC, they only look at hazard. Is something a hazard? And they don't look at exposure. And there's some certain things that we do with herbicides to limit exposure, and we'll talk about that moving forward. And what's also interesting is that IARC didn't take into account, like EPA, all of the data, all of the considerations that went into the decision to approve glyphosate for use and developing the label and everything. So they picked and choose what data they were using, which is also something that is unique about that group. So again, what is this group? They are the IARC is part of the World Health Organization. And one of its major goals is to identify causes of cancer. And then they group these things into different categories. And they've looked at over 1,000 of these over the years. And they have group 1, which they claim is carcinogenic to humans. Group 2A, possibly unclassifiable and probably not carcinogenic. So there's a lot of the word game going on in these different categories, and I'll talk a little bit about those. But that's the grouping that this group does. And when they classified glyphosate as a group 2A, that's really when it kick-started some of these issues with Roundup and the litigations. So the other 3 bodies of the World Health Organization are, you can see in that first bullet, there's 3 other entities that have looked at glyphosate and deemed it not causing cancer. There's been more than 800 studies on glyphosate that have been submitted to EPA, the European, and other regulatory agencies, and they've all reviewed those extensively, re-reviewed those, and found no link between cancer and glyphosate. It's still just one entity, which is the IARC. There's been more than 100 studies they reviewed with EPA cancer risk assessment, and they concluded that glyphosate is not likely to cause cancer. And glyphosate is registered in 160 different countries, which all have different regulatory bodies, and they've all reviewed that as well and not found that link. This is some of the regulatory authorities that have supported the use of glyphosate and the safety of glyphosate. And you'll see on the bottom left, Health Canada, the bottom right, EPA. You have a lot of, the world, 3/4 of the World Health Organization, European Food Safety. This is all throughout the world, folks that have reviewed this separately. So I just want you to have this information that there's one group, and it's IARC, and they're the ones that have made the claim that it does cause cancer, and that's where all of this is spun from, is that one group. Just so you guys have that information. Okay, this is probably the most important thing in my talk, if you guys can kind of grasp this concept. So the next slide will dive into this a little bit deeper as well, but risk and something that is risky, there's the hazard and then the amount of exposure, right? And hazard in the context of exposure is where you get risk. So when you have this lion caged up, right, the tiger represents the hazard, right? It's a hazard. Lion is a hazard to you, but we mitigate that risk by limiting the exposure, and we have that tiger in a cage, right? It's a very simplified, example, but that's really what we're looking at here. So like this pig example on the bottom right, the hazard is the sun. You could get burned. You mitigate the exposure by wearing sunscreen. We mitigate the exposure of spraying herbicides and pesticides by wearing PPE, by using labeled use rates. There's things that we do to mitigate our risk. And what's the IARC doesn't account for is that exposure. So they don't account for if you use it according to the label, if you're using PPE, if you're doing this, this, and this, that doesn't account. It's whether at any amount, any quantity, is there a hazard, and that's what they're looking at with glyphosate, Roundup, and all the things that they've reviewed. So what's also very interesting is IARC and EPA, they've actually been in the courts for quite a while now, because IARC is basically saying that there's a link between glyphosate and cancer, and then EPA is saying that there is no risk, or there is no link between glyphosate and cancer. So they've been at odds for a few years now. Okay, so IARC assesses only hazard, is harm possible. EPA assesses risk, is harm likely. And again, risk is you can mitigate by doing different things. So one example, you're driving a car. A car is a definite hazard, right? It's this 2-ton piece of metal that's driving down the road. If you hit somebody, it's going to be a bad day, right? You reduce your risk by wearing a seatbelt, having a driver's license, staying in the lane, don't text and drive. So these are things that we can do to mitigate the risk and that hazard. And that's something that the EPA is talking about. They review labels, right? They review how much of an herbicide you can use, what the PPE requirements are, and that's how we mitigate that risk and the exposure. Okay, so IARC overall, they've assessed the hazard. So over 4 decades, they've assessed 989 substances, and only one they've classified as probably not carcinogenic, which is pretty interesting when you look at it. This is a group of some of those classifications. So carcinogenic, if you drink beer, if you go outside, if you drink processed meat, or if you eat processed meats, bacon, things like that. UV, being out in the sun, those are carcinogenic as classified. You have group 2A, so glyphosate, you have red meat, very hot beverages, those are all classified within that same category. And then as you go down the list, the only one that hasn't been classified, so that group 4, is caprolactam, and I Googled that, and it's actually the stretchy spandex that you find in like stretchy pants. And so that's the one thing in that they reviewed that does not, that probably does not cause cancer. So it's all in context, right? It's important to understand this. Okay, and then the timeline is really important and interesting as well. So glyphosate, like I said, it was first registered in 1974, and then they released Roundup Ready in 1996 overall. And originally EPA classified it as non-carcinogenic. So what happened is IARC in 2015, they reviewed this and using their hazard classification, they said that it's got class 2A, probable carcinogen. So at that time, there were multiple public calls for glyphosate bans following that, right? There's folks out there that don't agree with herbicide use. There's folks that don't agree with the way things are, they don't agree with Monsanto. They don't agree with several different things. So there was these calls for public bans based off of that classification of IARC in 2015. And now we're in 2020, right? Where this is developed. So inclusion of glyphosate as a Prop 65 listed carcinogen in California in 2017. So what California did is they said, okay, we see that IARC did that classification in 15. We're going to take that a step further and say that using Prop 65, that we want to have, that carcinogen labeling on the jugs. And EPA said, no, you can't do that. We've reviewed this. We've shown that through mitigation, through reduced exposure and the use rates, it doesn't show that there's any link between cancer and that. And that's where they've been at courts since 2018 on that. It's further developed, like you guys know, where now there's this mass tort litigation where there've been cases that have come to California, and they've been the cases have gone against Bayer and Monsanto on those, and it's important to note that all of those are being appealed and nothing's been paid at this point. And I just recently, I think I have a slide on this, but it's been taken to the California Supreme Court now, the Johnson case, because again, EPA, there's no link between what the science is saying and what these results of these cases are. This is kind of a wordy slide, but if you look at that red box, it really tells a story. So unlike many other countries, plaintiffs in the U.S. can file lawsuits at little or no cost, and they face no risk of losing money if they are not successful, hence all the ads and things you see on TV all the time, right? As a result, the U.S. has more lawsuits than any country in the world, driving a $400 billion industry. So it's something to think.
Okay, so we were just at like the one where you were reading the red section.
Okay, perfect. Let me restart. There. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. All right, I think we're back. We good, Bonnie?
You're golden.
All right, sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so after these cases went in California, the rulings were conducted. EPA has been re-reviewing glyphosate, and they came out with these statements, actually, that glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic, which is EPA's most favorable conclusion, and that there is no risk to public health from the application of glyphosate. And that was in April of 19. And then they actually doubled down a few months later in August, and they said the state of California's much criticized Prop 65 has led to misleading labeling requirements for products like glyphosate because it misinforms the public about the risks they are facing. EPA's independent evaluation of the scientific data included a more extensive and relevant data set than IARC considered during its evaluation of glyphosate, from which the agency concluded that glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. And that's EPA, right? So that's where EPA has been at odds with IARC, which has been at odds with the way, the hazard review has been conducted with those guys. So this is just important information. Do you guys know the facts that go along with what's going on with this situation? So overall, glyphosate, it's been very important for 40 plus years, 160 different countries it's being used. They've had 800 plus studies. There's been these large applicators that they followed for many, many years just to evaluate whether there is a link between cancer and glyphosate, and they've yet to show that. And the recent court cases do not reflect the science supporting the safety of glyphosate. And I know I get questions all the time, and it's just knowing these facts. You can come to the table with some of these with certain folks, and it does help. But again, at the end of the day, some folks are very apt to not listening to what some of these facts and what these are. So just have these in your back pocket. And then this I just found yesterday. This was on the Bayer litigation website, and I'll flash that up in a little bit for more information for you guys. But Bayer remains committed to the Roundup settlement, and the settlement will involve all cases and future cases except for the 3 decisions that were made in California with those. Those are, one of them, like I said, has been elevated to the Supreme Court of California. And those ones, those rulings, those cases were already conducted, and it's really important that they, see these cases out and elevate them where they need to be to show and prove that there is no link between the glyphosate and cancer. From the science side of things. And then Monsanto, like I said, files a petition for review with California Supreme Court in that first Johnson case, and that's currently being conducted. And this was put out September of 2020, so about a week or 2 ago. And this is actually Sonny Perdue with USDA, and he said that glyphosate, the loss of this tool will be really devastating. And I'm afraid that while glyphosate, or these groups that oppose these types of uses, have not been able to win on the science side, they've gone to that litigation route, and that's really where the science meets the road with public opinion and different things, which is really difficult when you get in that type of situation, and why we're at where we're at. And for you guys, it's important. So addressing public concern, it's a good idea to develop your best management strategies and practices for your pesticide applications and your applicators and your crew. So you need to, be able to talk through some of these ideas, and that pesticides do not pose a significant risk. We can mitigate the risk by reducing the hazard, by using products according to the label, using PPE. So, when somebody comes up to you and says, what are you doing with this product? Are you using it safely? You say, yeah, I'm using it according to the label. Use rates are correct. I'm calibrated, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. and I'm using the proper PPE. It's really important. So, you know, it's also important in how you publicly, you know, talk about it, how you talk about it with your family and friends, you know the facts and be able to talk about it when that time comes. I think it's important that we defend it because, you know, glyphosate's just the first domino in this domino of potentially losing a lot of different tools in our toolbox. Here's some websites that you guys can go to that I think are useful. So you can go to bayer.com/glyphosate. I actually was on that glyphosate litigationfacts.com if you need more info, or you can reach out to me as well. I have a few handouts that are good that also have some of this information. Please reach out if you need anything. How much time I got, Bonnie? A few minutes, or am I done?
You can keep going. You got like, I don't know, 7-8 minutes.
Okay, cool. I'm just gonna go through this real quick. This is something that I've just been introduced to with our team. We actually have a Bayer VM app, and I highly recommend you guys check this out. And I'm going to walk through a little bit of the calibration section, and that's really what I think is the best part of this app is it has a walkthrough of calibrating and all these different types of equipment. And so you go to the Apple Store and you can search Bayer VM and you'll find the app there. And what you do is you download it and you see these different sections. You can actually get product label information, things like that. But you see this calibration calculator. That's the one that I really like. And I'm going to walk through a few examples of what that tool can do. It's nice to have in your pocket. And you know, if you're like me, calibrating isn't my most favorite thing to do. Like I'm sure a lot of you guys, but it's very critical, very important. And this is an easy way to kind of go through that. And if you go to calibration calculator, this is the different methods that it's going to walk you through. So you can do a boom and boomless sprayer, stationary calibration. Oh, did it again. Can you hear me, Bonnie?
Yep, we can hear you. We can see you.
I don't know what's going on. It keeps kicking me out. You guys see that?
We see a black screen. Oh, there it is, right there.
All right. So I just have 2 slides we'll get through real quick. All right. So in terms of backpack spraying, this is what comes up if you click the backpack sprayer. So you can go through these steps and it's just going to walk. Keep kicking me out, Bonnie. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
So since it's not working very well, that I would just recommend go through that app. It's really nice. It'll walk you through different ways to calibrate. And yeah, if you have questions on it, let me know. But you can go on Bayer VM and just download it. And yeah, hopefully this was beneficial. Yeah, I learned something about Roundup Glyphosate and please reach out anytime if you have more or need more information.
And we are recording this, so if you want to go back and watch it and get some of the information that he put up, you guys can do that as well.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Derek. And we'll just take a 15-minute break and we can initial some of these things.